Hey every, as you can tell by the thumbnail, this video is going to be about the Roaring Knight's identity. Obviously, spoilers for Deltarune chapters 1 through 4 ahead. Now, without any more random unimportant text, let's get into who I think is the Roaring Knight. To start off, I think that we can all agree that the Roaring Knight is a holiday. This theory is very widely accepted. It's led to people mostly an argument over which member of the holiday family the knight is. But, just in case you're not fully convinced that the knight is a holiday, here's a few pieces of evidence. The knight has deer-like horns, which is super reminiscent of a family of reindeer. The locations of the dark fountains that the knight opens are in places that the holiday family frequents, or at least they did at some point in time. The school, which Noelle and likely Des, before she went missing, attended, and the church that they went to every Sunday, or at least used to. The knight also first appears directly next to a Christmas tree in a snowy area. If this isn't tying the knight to holiday themes, I don't know what is. The knight also literally attacks with huge snowflakes. The knight also has no dialogue, meaning that they're silent. One might even say they're a silent knight.
Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck?
This is very much a long shot, though. Now's your chance to be a long shot? Okay. Anyways, even though this is a stretch, we can basically all agree that the Roaring Knight is a holiday. Within this theory, there's obviously three subsets of theories that come with it, and that's Carol Holiday, December Holiday, and Rudolph Holiday. Among these three subsets, Carol is definitely the most popular for casual players, as the phone call that Chris receives during Chapter 4 is most likely Carol, and it just seems obvious for most people who play the game. But for deeper enjoyers of Deltarune, such as you and myself, this is obviously a red herring. While a lot of people take the phone call to mean that Carol is working with the knight, or even is the knight, I think that it's likely misinterpreted. A lot of people reference the church tonight line, but even though this is generally interpreted as the knight or Carol telling Chris that a fountain will be opened at the church that night, it could be Carol talking to Chris about choir practice that night, especially because Noelle would be attending that also. So, personally, I think the phone call is definitely Carol, but not the knight. In my opinion, it's meant to lead casual players to believe that Carol is the knight, so that the end will be more of a twist. Alright guys, if you noticed a problem with that, you're smarter than I was when I scripted this video. You probably have already realized that when I was doing research for this, I completely forgot literally the beginning of the phone call that says this. So yeah, the person on the phone definitely knows about the dark fountains and it's not about choir practice, okay? I still don't think this phone call means that Carol is the knight, but I do think that the phone call could just be a coincidence, or Carol is working with the knight, or has a connection with the knight, which I will touch on later. Trust me. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's talk about why I think Carol is not the knight. The knight is left-handed. We know this because of how the knight always holds their sword in the left hand. However, we can clearly tell that Carol is right-handed. The game actually tries to make it pretty clear to us when Carol puts her right hand on Chris's shoulder in Chapter 4. But I do want to say that this evidence is a little bit flimsy, just because the knight does have attacks where they use their right hand. But I figured I'd put this in anyways because, a few people argue that Carol owning a literal katana means that she's obviously the knight, but everyone seems to forget the fact that light world objects and dark world objects, while correlated, are not typically one-to-one. Chris's pencil becomes a sword, so why would Carol's katana stay as is? Also, after Susie cracks the knight's sword in battle in Chapter 3, the player can go back to the holiday household in Chapter 4 and see that Carol's katana is completely unscathed. Both the one in the bedroom and the one displayed. Seeing as light world objects are very much affected by dark world use, this does not add up. Another reason it just wouldn't make sense for Carol to be the knight is that she is literally the mayor. She is someone notorious for disliking crimes and chaos, while the knight is quite literally the physical embodiment of chaos. Think about Carol's demeanor. She simply just wouldn't appoint the Chaos King to overthrow the government of Card Kingdom. While we're talking about Carol's position at the head of the community, mayors are generally insanely busy ordinary people who have crazy packed schedules and appointments and meetings. But the knight creates fountains whenever, it seems. Chapter 1's fountain was before school, sometime likely around 8 or 9 a.m., while Chapter 2's fountain was made around 3 or 4 p.m. The mayor simply wouldn't have enough time to be running around making fountains everywhere, especially while she's busy looking for her missing daughter. Also, Carol is very, very clearly at the house when Chris and Susie leave for the church, but the knight has already arrived and created 2 dark fountains by the time they get there. That's just not possible. With all that out of the way, we can all agree that Carol is a red herring for the knight's identity. All this evidence is very blatant and easy to theorize. Oh my god! All this evidence is very blatant and easy to theorize about, and fine, she's meant to be what players first think would make sense for the knight. It's kind of like the opposite of a twist villain. So now that I've established that the knight is a member of the Holiday family and not the mayor, let's talk about why I think Des is the Roaring Knight. After the discourse about Carol's katana, it's really easy to realize that the knight's sword looks way less like a traditional katana and more like a bat, especially when the fight in Chapter 3 first starts. The knight even looks as if they're about to wield it like a bat before switching to holding it like a sword. Des is consistently described as holding a bat, twice explicitly through dialogue in-game. It's also notably a cracked bat, as you can see on Noelle's desktop, which is eerily similar to the knight's cracked sword in Chapter 3. We've already established the knight left-handed thing. They hold their sword in the left hand, but sometimes they attack with their right hand. But if we're going by the logic that the knight holds their sword in the left hand, Des is also left-handed, which you can see by the positioning of her mousepad on the left side of her computer in Chapter 4. Speaking of her room, it's the exact same colors as Chris's Dark World sprite. Because we know colors in this game mean a lot, the colors being exactly the same could signify at the very least that the two have a connection. And since we know that Chris is working with the knight, it would make sense if they had a similar color scheme. This isn't exactly foolproof evidence toward Des being the knight, but it does have very interesting implications considering the rest of the evidence. Now let's take a dive into the unused dialogue hidden in the game files of Deltarune. It's speculated that this dialogue is from Des when she first went missing or wound up in the Dark World. What is this place anyway? How did I get here? As if I haven't asked that question a billion times already. I always did have that nightmare. Walking into the darkness with the light shining from the doorway, then the door slams behind me and everything goes black. Is this that nightmare? Or was everything else a dream? I'm starting to lose track of the time. Has it been days? Hours? If someone told me it's been years, I might believe them. Before, the sun came up, and so many wonderful things happened that made time meaningful. Things like breakfast or late night TV. In this place, I don't eat or drink anymore. I can't tell if I'm awake or dreaming. I can't even tell if I'm dead or alive. It's just nothing but pitch black silence. Except for the noise. The scratching noise I sometimes hear. This sounds crazy, but even though no one can hear me, when I hear that noise, I feel like someone's listening. Anyone, if you're there, thank you. Something that I didn't put in the script originally for this video, and I'm just now recording while I record these dialogue lines, is this scratching noise that she mentions in this dialogue is speculated to be people rummaging around in the files. So it's the noise that Des hears when we are searching for her in the files, and we're searching for this dialogue. Anyways, moving on. While there's no solid evidence that this is Des, it would just make so much sense. However, some people use this as a direct conversation. What? However, some people use this as a direct confirmation that Des isn't the knight, because she's somehow trapped in the code of the game. This does seem plausible, though it's not really 100% foolproof. So let's pretend it is for a moment. If Des's soul is stuck in the game files, and this dialogue is her, could she even be the knight? Well, the knight is portrayed very clearly as a dark, twisted creature who can't even speak. Chris, Susie, Noelle, and Birdley all traveled to the Dark World and never underwent a transformation like this. At most, their color palettes changed a little bit. So, if we're to believe that the knight is a lightener, we might assume that there's someone who's not fully intact, a little troubled, perhaps shattered across time and space? I'm only halfway joking. Gaster is the only other character present in Undertale and Deltarune that has these omniscient capabilities, and the power of seeing into the more meta aspects of the game. Kind of like this dialogue in the code. It is not a part of the Deltarune game, or the in-game universe. It's only there for people to find. If Des is in the code, just the same way that Gaster is, she also could have been shattered and spread out like this. One part of her being in the code, and another part of her being the knight. The knight opening fountains could be her looking for other parts of herself within the Dark World. And before you say, Taylor, how can you say this all just from a few unused lines of dialogue? They could be unimportant. Riddle me this. Toby oversees a shit ton of what goes into the Japanese translations of his games, so he would likely only have lines translated that are important to the lore and plot of Deltarune, right? There are hundreds and hundreds of code and unused dialogue in the files. So why are these specific unused lines translated into Japanese if they're not meant to be seen? It's almost as if they were created specifically for data miners to find. Toby is absolutely no stranger to hiding things in the game files, so I'd be inclined to believe this unused dialogue as canon. Also, I want to credit suzyundertale on Tumblr for this because that's where I found these unused Japanese lines. Thank you. Staying on the topic of this unused dialogue, when you speak to Spamton in his shop, he directly references this dialogue, saying this. Spamton is a puppet, and a popular theory in the fandom is that Spamton is controlled by Gaster. However, in another piece of Spamton dialogue, he goes to tell Chris something about the knight, only to be stopped by whoever is controlling him. We can assume that it's the knight, or someone working with the knight, that doesn't want Chris, or more likely the player, to know this information about the knight. So when defeating Neo Spamton through fighting and obtaining the puppet scarf, the dialogue when you attempt to equip it to Noelle, reading, "feels like guitar strings," seems very, very important. Perhaps even very, very interesting. Obviously, this is referring to Des. The only sprite consistently used to represent Des is her red, orange, guitar. So, does this mean December is controlling Spamton? Or a corrupt version of her is? Perhaps a masked man situation? He has confirmed that he takes direct inspiration from the game Earthbound, or Mother 3 in Japan, when he was making Deltarune. The main character of this game is a boy named Lucas, who has an older twin named Klaus. In an attack that kills their mother, Klaus goes missing and becomes the brainwashed masked man. The parallels between Lucas and Klaus, and Noelle and Des are very, very clear. Noelle and Lucas both have blonde hair, a shy disposition, easily get scared, and wield a strong, unique power. PK love for Lucas, and Snowgrave for Noelle. Des and Klaus are a little less apparent due to Des not having an official sprite, but they're both older siblings, are braver than their siblings, and disappeared, allegedly becoming masked, unidentifiable creatures. Since these relationships are very obviously paralleling each other, it seems that Des might similarly have become brainwashed, but instead of a masked man deuteragonist? How do I say that word?
Deuteragonist. Pronounced
Deuteragonist. What the hell? The second most important character in the story, okay? But instead of a masked man, second most important person in the story, she becomes the Roaring Knight. Klaus, even as the masked man, has the ability to pull 7 needles from the ground to destroy the world, which is also similar to the knight's ability to pluck fountains that will eventually cause the roaring.
The roaring. Quite frankly, it'll be the greatest roaring ever.
Speaking of parallels between games, the Asriel parallels between Deltarune and Undertale are also worth mentioning. Though I don't fully believe that Toby would just rip himself off and make a Flowey 2.0 out of the night, the Dreamer family in Undertale mirrors the Holiday family in Deltarune pretty perfectly. Queen Toriel to Rudy, a compassionate parent trying to protect their kid from their partner's wrath. King Asgore to Carol, a feared and respected authority figure within their communities. And finally, Asriel to December, the eldest child who went astray. Plus, Des and Asriel's relationship is heavily implied to be somewhat romantic. This dialogue in Chapter 2, where Noelle tells us that Des used to wipe Noelle's eyes with Azzy's jacket, plus the fact that Asriel's retainer is in her room. Obviously, even if they weren't dating, they were super close. This could imply that Des is suffering a similar fate to Prince Asriel's in Undertale, and that the Knight could be a parallel to Flowey. And on the topic of Undertale and Deltarune connections, when listening to Black Knife, the Knight's theme in the OST, you might notice how similar it sounds to this song from Undertale, Burn in Despair. This song plays when you fight Asriel in Undertale, and when you look at the Knight fight compared to Asriel's Hyperdeath boss fight, you start to notice a lot of similarities, like the smearing of animation and style of attacks, among other things. While some people may just write this off as evidence for perhaps Asriel being the Knight, we're led to believe that the two had some sort of relationship going on. And Toby often uses leitmotifs like this to signify past closeness or relationships between characters. See Asgore's theme? And if Asgore kept Toriel's leitmotif in the divorce, so can Des. Plus, it's pretty fun to picture Asriel teaching Des how to fight, which could be why the Knight's theme and fight style are so similar to Asriel's. And last, but definitely not least, we're going to talk about how Lost Girl, which is Des's theme, is in the key of B minor, while Black Knife is in the key of B major. This is not incredibly damning considering there's only 12 keys to choose from, but as u/throwaway Uga Lorga 2 discovered, the Knight's motif reversed is the Lost Girl melody. Also, I did not realize this when I was originally scripting this video. I'm actually editing right now, and I'm realizing that this part of Black Knife sounds literally identical to Lost Girl. Not even reversing it. Like, it's missing a few of the notes from the scale, but, yeah. So, it's, like, quite literally, like, the same. This is the most damning evidence that we have for Des being the Roaring Knight. We know that a lot of Toby's lore is simply shown through leitmotifs and musical analysis. They're so important, and the music is one of the most important places you can find lore. So yeah, that's why I think December Holiday is the Roaring Knight. So let's now talk about what I touched on earlier, Carol working with the knight. If Carol is working with the knight, who is Des, then why is she still so frantically searching for her missing daughter? She knows where she is, she's working with her. I think that the answer lies within the unused dialogue. These text lines seem like they're talking to the player. They seem in the present. In Spamton's shop, he even tells you that it sounds like they're talking to you. Talking. This is a current event. We already went over how Des could be scattered across planes of existence like Gaster was, and how a broken part of her could be the knight. So perhaps Carol is working with this unwhole part of her daughter, trying to find these other pieces of her to make her one person again. This is definitely a stretch, but I feel like with all the other this is definitely a stretch, but I feel like with all the evidence that we have, it just makes sense. The knight seems to be this sort of twisted, unholy creature, so it could just be a troubled version of Des, who isn't even fully aware of who she is. Anyways, as always, this theory is just that, a theory. I'm not even fully convinced myself, because as I was doing research for this video, I found a really good argument for Asgore being the knight. If you disagree with this theory or have anything to add on that I missed, let me know in the comments so that we can discuss, and maybe I'll have to make a part 2 where I admit defeat. Okay, bye.